Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast where we shine a spotlight on stories about local grassroots soccer stories here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. It's finally, it seems the heat wave may have broken a little bit. Knock on wood. Today was nice, so I'm surviving.
Today was a beautiful day. I think we get a couple of days of nice weather, of more typical San Diego weather before we get into some warm weather again. I want to start us off with something that has absolutely nothing to do with soccer because it was something I became aware of today. I don't know if you had heard the news. Did you hear that Mark Wahlberg is opening up a new Mexican restaurant in San Diego?
I had not heard this. No.
I had not either. And you know what? I mean, thank God a Bostonian could come to San Diego to bring us some good Mexican food because
Oh, right.
my whole life I've been waiting for some good Mexican food in San Diego.
Well,
I,
you know what would be funny, because I saw it would be funny if it was a guy named Mark Wahlberg, but it wasn't the Mark Wahlberg to replace
no,
the Jimmy
it is
Carter's
the Mark Wahlberg.
to replace. You know what I'm talking about, though, the Jimmy Carter's Mexican food in Hillcrest that was
Yeah.
not the Jimmy Carter that recently closed. I always got a good laugh out of that one.
Yeah, I looked it up on. It's called Flecha Cantina, and I think it's based on as a tequila brand.
I would be willing to
Flecha
bet it's going to be
Azul.
more in the way of any Consortium Holdings restaurant than it will be Hole in the Wall Taco Shop.
Oh yeah,
so.
it is foo fancy. I think the website said reimagined, not reimagined Mexican food, but like re-experience Mexican food. I think is what it said. But it's opening in Forest Ranch, and that probably tells you all you need to know
There you go.
about the type of restaurant it's going to be. So probably actually will be successful in Forest Ranch. But yeah, that's I read that and I just had to laugh about, it's just, that's like, I don't know. It reminds me of what his restaurant is to Mexican food, what PF Chang's is to Chinese food.
Yeah,
and
I say
it's
this
there, but
right.
it's got a whole different atmosphere to it than maybe your local Chinese food shop that you have.
I say this as someone who very much enjoys the infrequent trips to PF Chang's I make, but it is very much corporate American Chinese food. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what this looks like here, and probably something to help push his tequila brand. So anyway, I just had to get that off my chest because I saw that it's been bothering me all day. Not that I'll make any big trips to go there, but my thought is like, wow, you're bringing like the whole big news story about how you're bringing a Mexican restaurant to San Diego. So anyway, let's get into some soccer news, just in some of our banter here before we start. You being a Spurs fan, what are your feelings about Daniel Levy stepping down as chairman?
I can't believe this podcast hasn't happened since that. It feels like it's been ages since that happened in the Spurs world. I don't know. Daniel Levy's legacy is a bit difficult, and I think that as somebody who's not a local born fan or local resident, never has been, my perspective is probably a little bit skewed because I come at it from the perspective of like my experience with American sports fans. Like when I think of Daniel Levy, or owners rather, when I think of Daniel Levy as a chairman, I'm comparing him to guys like John Fisher. So it's like a pretty low bar, right? Subterranean even. But that said, I think when you look at it through the lens of both the off the field and the on the field, success or lack thereof, I guess, for Spurs, over the last 24 years of his tenure, he's taken Spurs from like a mid-table club with some history to part of the top six conversation, to the point that nobody even really questions anymore what you mean when you say the top six. I mean this with all due respect to clubs like Leeds or Everton, but if Levy hadn't been as shrewd and as clever as he was, I think Spurs would probably look a lot more like Leeds or Everton today than they do modern day Tottenham Hotspur. So
All right.
to him, we owe the stadium, the training ground, the youth academy setup. So his legacy is very much built in concrete. It's not. It's something that I think in 5-10 years time, when history is being written about his time at Tottenham, he will have mostly positive things written about him. The caveat, though, and I know it feels like I'm building up to a big but here, but really the only thing is I think he needed to step away sooner. And it sounds like this decision was actually not his. It was maybe taken out of his hands a little bit, which I don't know. I have some other feelings about that, but that's kind of another question. But I think had he stepped away when the stadium was finished in 19, or in 21 when we were clearly coming out of COVID financially stable, I think he could have stepped away at those points and maybe been lauded really just as a hero. Although maybe he would have had to step away in 2017, something like that, because the 2018 2 transfer windows in a row without signing a player, I think, is a lot of what young fans think of when they think of Daniel Levy. In addition to the stadium and the training ground, but going a full calendar year without signing a player is like unheard of in the modern game, right?
Right.
So I think he did enough towards the end that put enough asterisks on his legacy that even the trophy he's going out with isn't enough to leave a fully positive taste in the mouth of most Spurs fans as he walks out the door. So I think, like I said, give it 10 years. I think he will be overwhelmingly looked back at as a positive, very successful chairman for Tottenham Hotspur. But and I know other Spurs fans might hate that I'm doing this, but I think a really good comparison just down the road is actually Arsene Wenger. I think if he had stepped away 5 years sooner than he did, his legacy would be a lot more intact than it is now with Arsenal.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true for Levy.
Hard to go out
Yes.
on top, or sometimes know when to go
It
out.
really is, and it's so much
overextend your
easier
stay.
said than done. It's right.
Yeah.
It's so easy to say that from the outside.
Yeah. Well, I was super excited that Paramount was covering Bradford City match last weekend, so I finally got to sit down and watch a full match televised and not just follow things on some kind of news ticker. And probably definitely their worst game of their season, their first loss of the season, but they looked terrible. They just got carved up on defense, and so still sitting in fifth. So I'm happy about that. Happy with the start. A couple other times I've actually been able to see some games, they've played well. So again, I'm just hoping they can stay up right now in League One and slowly work their way back up.
Do they not?
Who knows?
Have
Maybe someday back into the Premier League.
Do they not have like a club streaming service, or League One doesn't do any sort of thing you could sign up to watch? Obviously Wrexham, but I know when Wrexham won the National League, there was kind of like a streaming thing you could do.
I have not looked into it, and as I said, I'm loosely following Bradford City.
Probably but if you could watch games and you knew you could, wouldn't that make it a little bit easier? Yeah.
I did toy with becoming a supporter. I looked into it. Just again, it was my dad's team, so there's ties there. I don't know that I would say it's my team, or maybe it will be at some point down the road. Maybe I'll get more invested, but for right now, it gives me another thing to have an interest towards and follow and keep a little closer eye on what's happening over in England with soccer, which, in years past, I really didn't too much because I never had a team I wanted to follow. I can't say I really want to follow Bradford, but it feel like I'm getting sucked in deeper and deeper every week. So, anyway, so we're gonna tonight, just a little preview of what's coming up. We're gonna continue our Pro-Rel series and with Japan. So last week was part 3. We looked at Japan and their football structure they have and how they went from 0 professional teams in 1990 to a full 7-tier plus pyramid connected with promotion relegation in 2025. So we didn't quite finish everything we wanted to do. So we're going to go back and kind of see what the US might be able to learn from what Japan was able to do over the last 35 years. And maybe debunk some of those ideas that people say you need 100 years of experience to develop a robust pyramid. So we'll do that as the main part of our show, but we do have some stuff to cover, which we didn't last week, in terms of some Pro-Rel news and some Cup news and some current events. But let's jump into some San Diego stuff first, because I think the biggest news locally is Alex Morgan having her jersey retired. So you get a chance. I know you go to Wave matches sometimes.
I did
Did
actually.
you get a chance to go out to that?
I was at the game. Yeah. I got there later than I'd have liked. So I didn't get to see any pregame ceremonies or anything of the like that they may have had. And by halftime, they were already down 2-0. So the vibe had kind of been sucked out of the place. So I didn't really see any ceremonies if there was one. But yeah, I did get to go. It was a good crowd. I think probably about 12, 15,000 if I had to guess.
Yeah, I saw some things online. Shout out to the Sirens for their tifo that they did. A little
Yes,
nod
that was
to
very good.
The 1966 surf documentary classic, Endless Summer. So that with Alex Morgan on it and a surfboard, and that was good. I thought that was well done. I really think Sirens, they're not like Timbers Army, maybe doing this half the stadium, big tifo display, but I think they nail it in concept and message every single time. I think it goes to show you don't have to do a 5-panel tifo every single match to still get a good message out there. So again, huge shout out to the Sirens and all the people who worked on that. Thought that was well done. But, and this has nothing to do with the Sirens, I want to get your take on the jersey retirement, maybe more as a concept. And this is nothing against Alex Morgan. Her body of work speaks for itself, right?
Yeah.
No question about her status and everything she's done on and off the field for the women's game. But I'm curious because I have some feelings in terms of soccer about retiring jerseys. And also, what was she with the Wave? 3 years? I mean, she helped start the Wave, as did a bunch of other players. But I really, this, in a strange way that has nothing, again, to do with Alex Morgan, but this concept of a jersey retirement for someone who was with you for 3 years, it just seems forced, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Jersey retirements for me, I'm kind of, when I think of them, my brain goes to the history in baseball and in football specifically. I know hockey does it too, but I'm just not as steeped in the history of hockey. Same thing with basketball. Baseball historically, and actually football still to an extent, actually no, within the rules, the numbers mean something, right? It's not just you pick whatever number you like. And baseball historically, not as much anymore. So when like the Yankees retired numbers 1 through 9, basically the reason those numbers are all retired is because historically those players always wore them, right? And so it meant almost an even bigger deal to retire that number, because that meant like you're retiring out this number that for a long time, even after maybe it literally meant something, it symbolically meant something. Like 3, right? Even to me, even though I've never lived in the era where 3 meant the first baseman in terms of jersey number, I still, if a first baseman is wearing number 3, I'm like, oh, hey, that's nice, you know? Right. So it has those historic meanings, and I can see why it would make people uncomfortable. But I think, especially in baseball, again, football, the numbers actually do still mean things in terms of like eligibility to catch passes and things like that. But in baseball, the meaning has largely been decoupled from the number, even if it, like, symbolically, like I just said, kind of still is fun. Soccer's much the same. It used to be like when we talk about the number 6, number 7 being a winger,
right?
A number 9, right? Those used to be specific things that came out of the 2-3-5, the original like formation in soccer. And as it moved into the WM, and then you get into modern day, right, that's where we get those terminologies from. So it has again been decoupled in the same way baseball has. It doesn't really mean anything beyond what the fans and the players hold it to mean. That said, it's always felt a little bit stranger in soccer just because it's not really a thing that is done, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and
Generally,
it's not a worldwide thing, certainly.
right.
That's a very
And
American thing.
and I think too that it's coming in the direct juxtaposition to Liverpool retiring, as far as I'm aware, the only number they've retired, number 20, in honor of an active player dying on his way back
Right.
to training camp, right? So it's like
Yeah.
played 3 years in San Diego, died in the shirt, figuratively. It's like this you could point to that and say like those are different levels of seriousness to this, but I don't know that that's really a helpful comparison because again the culture's different in American sports. Like retiring a number is a thing we do. So that was kind of not your question, but that's broadly my thoughts on like retiring numbers, specifically with Alex Morgan. I don't know. I kind of get it because while she was there a short amount of time, she was there for the first 3 years, right? It's not just like she was there for years 11 through 14 or whatever, or 11 through 13, I guess. She was like the first big, statement signing. She helped
Sure.
ingratiate the team to the city and was very successful on the field for the first couple of years. I know as age caught up with her, I think she would admit she slowed down a little bit. So I can see in terms of like gravity and importance to the club why that would happen. And to give another counterexample from Europe, a counterexample to Liverpool, Birmingham City, when they sold Jude Bellingham to Dortmund, retired his jersey number because that financial windfall saved the club from going into administration. So he was like an 18-year-old kid, had played less than 100 times for the senior team, but they retired his shirt because his sale kind of saved the club, right? And so I think you could kind of compare it more to that one where it's like it's the significance to the history of the club and the existence of the club and the community impact of the club in Alex Morgan's case more so. So I kind of get it. I think at face value in a vacuum, you're right. A player who's only there for 3 years, 2.5 ish, it's a little bit like strange, but I think in this case, I get it, even if the cynical part of me does kind of see it as a bit of a marketing thing.
Yeah. I get the sentimental value that you mentioned with Joda and and some of these examples and I do. And I think obviously each club and each community gets to make those decisions. No one should be dictating those things. I just if I were making the rules maybe for my own club, I would like to see, especially if it's a player, at least a decade pass
Yeah.
before you even consider someone, just
Yeah.
just to not have the recency bias sometimes, because I think you'd run out of jerseys to retire pretty darn fast. I think sometimes you need to let it settle. And even if Alex Morgan, being a part owner of the Wave, stayed around and contributing, was part of San Diego, and then 10 years later, people thought like, this was a good idea, even though she only played 3 years. Like, I could
That's
totally see
fair.
that. But again, I'm happy for Wave fans. I'm happy for her, for the celebration and everything. Again, nothing against this. I don't know, maybe because it's a very Americanized thing. We don't do this in soccer very often.
Yeah.
But I love the tifo. I loved
Yeah.
everything else. And you know what? Thankful for the years we had her here playing for the Waves. So
Yeah, absolutely.
nothing to take away from any of that.
Alex Morgan, more than any single player, man or woman, is responsible for me getting into the game of soccer. I was like on the precipice of really becoming a big soccer fan, and then the 2011 Women's World Cup happened where she
Mm.
broke onto the scene, and that's where I fell in love with the game. So I
Oh, I think we lost Dylan. We had an internet connection. So um, I am going to just kind of continue and pick up here because I think we're kind of wrapping up this conversation about Alex Morgan. And since we're talking about players with, jokingly a tenuous connection to San Diego, we might as well give a shout out to former loyal Augie Williams, who got his 100th goal contribution in the USL Championship this last weekend. He's the 9th player in league history to do so. And then former loyal Kyle Vassell also back to his scoring ways for Colorado Springs. So that will kind of wrap up some of our San Diego connection news. And let me see, we might have Dylan back with audio. Oh, can you hear video? Okay.
There, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
I can hear you. Yeah. We'll go ahead and switch gears here. I just kind of tidied some
real
things
quick.
up from
I
the
did
San
want
Diego.
to. I'm sorry about that. I swear.
Go ahead.
This new computer is going to kill me. But I did want to say real quick on the jersey retirement number, something I did see recently that I thought was super interesting. They had talked about retiring Diego Jota's 21 number with the Portuguese national team. But the thing is, specifically at the World Cup, you can only have numbers 1 through 26 for the 26-man squad. So to retire a number, they would have to reduce the squad size going forward.
Reduce
so obviously
the squad, yeah.
Right, they're not going to do that. So what they ended up doing was having Ruben Neves, I think is his name. Yeah. I don't know why that feels wrong, but that's definitely his name. He will be wearing it because they were like best friends. But I thought that was kind of an interesting, other side to that conversation, where on the national side, it just like it can't happen. And honestly, when you start to think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because then like you would never get Riquelme wearing number 10 because Maradona would have, and then you'd never get Messi wearing number 10 because Riquelme would have. And
right.
like it just, anyway, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. All good points. Sorry for that, but we're going to move now to some of our other current events here around the world, and I'd like to get your thoughts, because UEFA, their executive committee, is going to have a measure in front of them this week about whether or not they're going to approve specifically 2 cases: a La Liga match being played in Miami and a Serie A match being played in Perth, I believe, somewhere in Australia. I think it was Perth. But this is right. This is one of those key events, and I'm paraphrasing some things that are, and I thought it was a good article in The Independent by Miguel Delaney. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, that's talking about this, that, there was a court case that Relevant brought to try to force this game to happen in Miami, this La Liga match. And that ended up getting settled in the spring. And now Relevant is the new broadcast partner for UEFA for like the next 8 years. So the writing on the wall is this is going to be rubber stamped and approved. And these 2 matches at least are going to happen, even though it won't be a blanket. People can go out and about and just start playing their games wherever they want. But as Miguel Delaney points out, and he's also the author of that book, States of Play, and really talks about, some of these key decisions and these big money influencers and how they're shaping the game, that once you do this and approve it, you've kind of let the genie out of the bottle and there's no way to put it back in. Yes, you might be approving these 2 fixtures only, but what happens when the next person or someone else wants to file a lawsuit and say, why can't we do it here? You've already approved these, so why aren't you going to approve those? And it was interesting. I wasn't aware of this. In the article, it points out in 1999, the only case that has gone to court and where there's actually been a judgment is that UEFA defended its position that, like, if you're in Serie A, you have to play your games in Italy. And if you're in England, at the time part of the European Union, but like, you have to play your games in your home country. You can't stage matches somewhere else. And it was to help overall to protect the game. So his argument in the article is, the executive committee has a chance to say no here. There is legal precedent to stand behind it. The only legal precedent there is, even though a lot of people are arguing that it's a done deal. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, if UEFA approves it, as I think everyone expects them to do here on Thursday, that these 2 matches go forward. What are the potential unintended consequences moving forward of big clubs, especially staging league matches somewhere else to to make money. That's all it is. The only reason to do this is to bring in extra money. There's no other reason.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much sum it up there. And I'm actually going to turn off my camera here, and I'm sorry, my internet is telling me it's having some issues, so I'm still here. I might come back on if it gets better. But anyway, yeah, it's just for money, and it's kind of gross, I think. It's a very American idea, and I worry that is not just a figurative thing. It's pretty literal, probably. Some American business people probably making this happen, but I think once it happens, every league in Europe is going to jump on this, because why would they not? Especially, you look at a report just came out that Real Madrid and Barcelona are responsible for like 50% of all revenue generated in La Liga. Like, of course they would do that. Why would they not? They'd make so much more money coming to the United States charging $1,000 a ticket, because they can do that here. Whereas they can't really do that, with their socios back in Spain. So yeah, it's setting a bad precedent. I think it's, once it goes through, I don't see why other leagues wouldn't do it too. I think it's just another step towards the end of football as we kind of know it and enjoy it.
Right. I agree with you, and I'm afraid of the unintended consequences. And as Miguel Delaney points out in this article, this really opens the door for the people with money and power, the sovereign wealth fund nation people, like those people. They're the ones that really now can dictate and drive what happens. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, especially at the biggest clubs. And, as some people are arguing, this is just getting us really one step closer to, it might not be exactly the way they envisioned it before, but a super league, or like, great, you can be your team, but you don't have to play anymore at home. You can play matches wherever you want around the world. And I worry, like, one of the things I think we love the best about pick any team, but the history they have playing at those grounds, and the fans and the passion of the fans at those grounds, those are part of the memories. And when you start picking up a La Liga match and playing in Miami, like, okay, to use the NFL as an example, I don't know how many memorable matches, even if it is a great game, but really memorable matches are the NFL games that are played in London, except for maybe some quirky thing. Like, because it's not the same. You don't have the same fans. It's not the away team playing at the home team's venue. Like, they're both away teams. It's just, I think it sucks a lot of the passion out of the game. It's a great experience, possibly for those people who get the opportunity to go, who might never get to go to the country where that game would normally be played and the stadium where that would normally be played. But otherwise, I think it really sucks the culture and the passion from the game. Is, as we talk about, it becomes more corporate. Like, we'll go to wherever we can make the most money, and then I don't think it's as interesting anymore.
Well, and the NFL specifically, I know they had a game in Sao Paulo this year, and they have games in other parts of the world as well. But they, I know that there are fans of NFL teams who don't love, especially when their team has a home game, quote unquote, in some disparate part of the world that they're never ever going to, pay to travel to. But they are told they are made whole on that loss with things like draft picks or cap space, or these financial incentives that the league can offer, because it is a closed structure where they are franchises of the league, right? And so I fear too that, like, if this goes over and fans just kind of accept it again, I don't know how Italian fans relate to their clubs. I speak a little Italian, but not like fluent enough to really like indulge in Italian media or anything. But I fear that if they are presented with this kind of dichotomy that American fans have been, where it's like, yeah, this sucks for you, but like on the whole, your club's going to make a lot more money. Like they might accept it in the short term, and that in the long term, that's going to set just this horrible precedent. Yeah, I don't know. You kind of wonder at what point are people going to start turning towards the FC United, Manchester type clubs of the world, right? Because like at the end of the day, I like Real Madrid playing Barcelona, and I recognize that American fans don't always recognize these aspects of it. But part of what makes it so interesting is like the geopolitical clash there, right? It's the seat of the crown versus like the always wannabe breakaway, like independent state. Same thing in the old firm. It's the Protestants versus the Catholics. Like it's, you know, in fucking Rome, it's the former fascists versus the former fascist light. It's like, you know, so it's like these historical, as you talk about the culture that you're totally washing away. And, you know, I know the people who will make the money off of it don't give a shit. I hope that fans are as outwardly rejecting of this as they were the Super League. I just fear that it won't be as united a front as it was.
Probably not. When one can only hope for that as well. But let's bring it to the U.S. here for a second. Jeff Reuter had a good article in The Athletic about the NWSL and them losing players overseas because they're paying more, right? And because of the salary constraints for the way the NWSL is structured. And, you know, I thought it was it's basically a good article and discussion about salary cap. But I also think it's a good discussion if you dive a little deeper between the difference of, well, ultimately in the long run, how do you develop or maintain your top league, your Division I league? Like, do you build it over time with a pyramid and the best kind of rises to the top, or do you buy it, which I would say is the way we do it in America? Like we figure out rich owners and we just jump in there and we try to buy top players and bring them in without really any foundation underneath it. And one of the reasons to help the NWSL, you know, survive like Major League Soccer did when it first started was to institute these salary restrictions to help level the playing field. Someone didn't come in and just create a dominant team. And it works within the constraints of what you're designing as a closed league. But when you're playing a global game, which the NFL isn't, right? Basketball is a little more open to things, but the NFL specifically is not a global game. You don't have the same competition for players worldwide, so the NFL can do things a little differently. But when you're soccer and you try to mimic the NFL or mimic an American sport, and as the NWSL is seeing, they're hitting a financial wall, and frankly, other clubs across the Atlantic are willing to pay more money for some of our young players to go play over there. And some of these players are taking advantage of that and going. So it was a good article for that, but there was one particular point that I had to call out this sentence and make a comment about it, because I think it ties into the bigger conversations and discussions we've been having since we started this podcast about how we treat things here in America. And as we're looking around the world and other groups building their pyramids and structures, how they treat sport a little differently. So one of the lines from the article was, a well-balanced budget sheet does not build a club. Players do. And I would strongly disagree with that. I mean, players do. You need players. They help build the memories of the matches. But your community is what builds your club. And if you think about any big club around there, we think about the passion of the supporters who show up game in, game out, and those home, make those home matches passionate, interesting matches. I remember the games back from COVID. You have two of the best teams playing in the world, but without fans, it's not the same. It may not be boring. I was going to say boring. It still might be a good game, but it feels like a practice game. It doesn't
It feels
feel
sanitized. It doesn't
it feels
feel
sanitized.
right. It doesn't have the raw emotion to it.
And I think when you leave out the fans, when you leave out the community that club is centered in or a part of, and you're really only focused on the money, and the further away you get from the fans, you start to lose that. And I think we'll see that in some of our conversations with Japan here in a couple minutes. But that was a key thing I wanted to point out, that I think still, like, in this country, even our soccer writers and talking about sport in this country, we default, I think, as Americans to protection of a league. Like, well, if the NWSL is going to keep retaining good players, not, man, we really should figure out how to build a solid foundation underneath this league so players can rise up. It's, we got to open up the checkbooks. And if we open up the checkbooks, it means we need to change some other things. It's all about how do we protect the league and try to get the best players here at our league, and not really about developing American players either, which I think is also a mistake. I think you can do both, but I think when you neglect one, so especially the development of your own players in your own country, you handicap yourself for the long run on how successful your top tier league ultimately can be.
Well, and I think too that this is a good kind of, litmus test, if you will, when discussing kind of US soccer as an organization and as a structure with people. If somebody can't wrap their head around the idea that a fully built out pyramid with competitive lower leagues is better for the national team, if somebody can't understand that, I don't think there's like a lot of conversation to be had, right? Because
and
that
it's better for your first division,
right?
It's
but to
better
me,
for
that
both.
is. But even the leagues aside, like if you were just looking at it from purely like I want America to be the best soccer team nationally that they can be, like this, it is self-evidently true that a more competitive second and third division, giving players places to cut their teeth and learn their trade in a competitive environment, will
along
be
with
better.
coaches.
Right. Exactly. Coaches too. Even the kit man. Shit, you want the best kit man you can get. This
Marketing,
is what
everything.
Right, allows them. It's what allows the best of the best to rise to the top. Because I'll tell you what, and this is a good example, and I recognize I'm no level of player. I mess around in my rec leagues and stuff, but one of the best soccer players I've ever had the pleasure of playing with was a guy who told me he just grew up playing on the streets of Mexico City and never once played for a competitive club or anything. And like, obviously I'm comparing having played with this guy versus having watched other competitive games, but the way he handled the ball was genuinely one of the best, dribblers I've ever seen, pro or otherwise. And I'm not saying the guy could have gone pro if he'd been afforded an opportunity at a younger age, but he is exactly the kind of person I think of when I think of the players that fall through the cracks with the system we have, right?
Yeah.
Because the system we have is never going to catch a player like that.
No, not with the system we currently have, certainly. All right, let's on that note, we'll switch over to some cup news here. And tomorrow we have the semifinals of the USL Cup, the Jägermeister Cup.
Oh shit, that's true.
We got Rhode Island hosting Sacramento. I believe that's the 4:00 game, and then Hartford hosting Greenville, the last of the USL 1 teams involved. So we got the semifinals. And any quick comments or thoughts on those matches?
No, I didn't realize that was tomorrow. I would love to see a Rhode Island Greenville final. I think that would be, from a personal perspective, the most interesting. But also, I think having a League One team, even go as far as to win this, but especially be in the final, would be
Yeah.
one of the best things possible for increasing the competitiveness of this tournament in future years.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting. I'm sure I will check them out tomorrow. I always love me, do or die matches. They're always
Oh
a bit
yeah.
more fun and intense and more crowd involvement. So I will definitely be checking those out tomorrow. But we have a lot more cup news because we're in this weird transition between wrapping up the 2025 Open Cup, which their semifinals are next week. So that's coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. But then the 2026 first qualifying round for all the amateur teams that would like to get into the Open Cup, that qualifying tournament starts this weekend, is the first round of games. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there will be games around the country. There's not going to be, not all the teams will be in play. Specifically for us, because we talked about maybe trying to catch a match. All our local San Diego teams have a bye in this first round. They have a bye straight to the second round, which should be mid-October. So City SC, FC Balboa, Rebels SC, and San Diego Inter all have byes. So we don't have any local matches yet, but we will next time around. And I imagine between those four teams, there's going to be 2 games with all 4 of those teams. I think all the San Diego teams are going to have to play against each other and probably get down to one final San Diego team before we get matched up with someone else somewhere down the line. I mean, there's only 3 more rounds after this, so potentially when we get to the last San Diego team, then there might be some other Southern California team we may have to face, and that may determine who makes it actually into the Open Cup proper. So we should have some good matches coming up here in the fall that we should, get a chance to go out and see. So just a word about that's coming up. The first round is this weekend. Just all our San Diego teams have a bye to the second round. So lucky for them, I guess. And they're all in season right now. So all those teams are playing in the UPSL fall season. So they won't be just showing up, to play a game, and they haven't really played competitive matches. So they're playing weekly competitive matches right now as well.
Well, best of luck to them. That's exciting. Hopefully, one of them can get that spot.
Yeah, and then the last bit of news, some Pro-Rel news. I think it was confusing. The Court of Arbitration for Sport had a ruling on the second division teams in Mexico about reinstituting promotion relegation.
Oh, I had not seen this.
Yeah, I saw 2 different articles come out, and they had contradictory information in it, and I think some people didn't read the results of the arbitration carefully enough. The second division teams were asking for immediate, basically, reinstatement. The results of this year then would go right into promotion relegation. The Court of Arbitration for Sport denied that, saying based on everything they saw that this 6-year ban carries all the way till the end of this current season, which means the next season we look at the results, and at the end of that season, so at the end of the
right, and that kind of is
27.
And this is something you run into a lot when you start actually digging into the nitty gritty of legal proceedings, but though I don't like it, that actually makes a lot of sense. If you put a 6-year ban on promotion and relegation, it logically follows that means for full 6 seasons, the results don't impact your status in the top league. So while I don't like that, it is sounding to be like the correct ruling, if I'm understanding correctly.
Right. So technically the appeal was denied, but as part of that discussion was the appeal's denied because it runs to the end of 6 years. But at the end of the 6 years, you better be instituting promotion relegation again. That's basically what it said. So it looks like, barring other court case, because who knows? I mean, we're not quite 2 years away from that moment where you'd have to actually determine promotion relegation. Who knows what'll happen? But as it stands right now, things look very positive that promotion and relegation is coming back in some form, some way to Mexican soccer.
Good. I'm glad. Mexico is. I think Mexico is one of those countries that if their infrastructure nationally was more robust, they could and should be a world powerhouse, right? I mean, it's a massive
Yeah.
country obsessed with football, and I think, as we talked about, promotion and relegation in a full pyramid is better for a nation. So, yeah, I'm happy for Mexican soccer if that does go forward as we understand it too.
Yeah, me as well. So we'll keep an eye on that story as that progresses over the next, year and a half or so. Okay, so let's finally circle back to where we left off last week, talking about Japan. I'm not going to go over everything we covered last week, obviously, but one of the things we looked at last week, if you didn't get a chance to listen to it, and I encourage you to go back at some point and listen to the structure of how Japan, again, went from 0 professional teams in 1990 to a 7+ tier pyramid 35 years later, because there's a lot of detail there. But one of the things we looked at is the parallels in the development of soccer through the 20th century, how in the 60s, we had the NASL. I mean, we had a couple other leagues just before that, but the NASL was the one that kind of took hold for a while. But we had a professional league and kind of jump-started professional soccer again after, what are we talking, a 40-year kind of hiatus. And in Japan, they also started some leagues in the 60s, but they were semi-professional in nature. But they also really were holding true to kind of the world's vision of promotion relegation, where in the US we were following the American model and the NASL, and you have franchises, and you bring in big players and spend money, and that's the American way, right? And you spend money to make money. So in the mid part of the 20th century, there was a little bit of a diversion. But in the 90s, when both countries developed their most recent versions of professional leagues, we really took drastically different pathways. And we went into detail about that last week. And one of the things that helped guide Japan was something that they called their 100-year vision. And they wanted to have 100 professional teams by 2092. So that they had this vision and this drive to work together to build a pyramid to get there. And we didn't get a chance to talk about this last week, but I think it's funny to kind of contrast this Japan's 100-year vision with U.S. Soccer's Project 2010. So I don't know age-wise, Dylan, do you remember anything about Project 2010?
No,
This came up right after the 2002 World Cup. So 2002 World Cup, U.S. Soccer advances the furthest, in modern times, the furthest it has advanced in a World Cup. Going to as people like to refer to the non-handball against Germany, that was called, or the non-call of a handball on the goal line. But right after that success, then U.S. Soccer got together and they developed Project 2010 on how the U.S. would win a World Cup by 2010. And I think of the stark contrast, the American hubris of we made it to the quarterfinals, so World Cup, fine, we can make it to the semis next time, and then 2010 we can win the whole thing. Piece of cake.
That is the most American thing I've ever heard. I think.
How are we going to organize U.S. soccer? And I think that was also, I mean, if you look at that Project 2010, and we can dig into this on another episode later, and you look at some of the stuff that was really shaping the strengthening of Major League Soccer and kind of the pushing down of all the other leagues also happened a lot at this time, because developing Major League Soccer was the way to have a better national team. Was part of the thinking. So there a lot more goes into it than that, but I just think of those two things, and Japan's vision, like, we don't want just, what does MLS have now? 30 professional teams. They were like, we want 100 teams. Well, how do you have 100 teams? You can't have 100 teams in one big wide league. So let's develop a pyramid structure. And I think as we went through all the details last time, I think there's a lot of things we can learn from Japan. And I have, like, for me, 3 big takeaways. And I'll do them one at a time. And then, Dylan, I'll let you jump in with kind of anything else you have. Like, my first one is their licensing / associate member system that they have, which is in a way similar to our professional league standards, our PLS, but a little bit different. Now, I think it's not too cynical to say that there was like a twofold reason for creating the PLS in the US. It was to identify some standards to make sure you weren't getting ownership groups or other things that weren't able to meet those standards. But I think most people would also argue that they were created and drafted in a way that really made it difficult for USL teams or anything else or leagues to kind of also get a Division I status. I mean, I would argue, and I think a lot of other people would as well, that there was a twofold thing to those. On the surface, it's like, well, these are standards you have to achieve, but we're designing them in a way that almost nobody except Major League Soccer can achieve those.
Well, it's a lot. I mean, it's one of the. It's a lot like. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But in society, as progress rolls forward, you'll see certain groups of people try and pass laws that don't explicitly exclude certain groups of people, but in practice exclude.
Have the effect, yeah.
Right, and that's exactly what happened with the PLS.
Right, and I think with what Japan did, especially with their licensing structure, and would be my interpretation on a very surface level. I haven't digged into this incredibly deeply, but on a surface level, it seems that their licensing associate membership system really was designed with a goal to help elevate people into being a professional club rather than push people down and prevent them from being a professional club. And one of the things, when I looked into it, I think I only saw it wasn't even a stadium requirement in terms of licensing. So to be licensed for J3, the 3rd division of the J League, I think you had to have you had to have an average attendance of 2,000 people. And I think when I looked at it, that was the only attendance thing. There's nothing about stadium size. Anyway, like some of the things we have in our professional learning standards, there's nothing about you have to be in a city that is million plus metro market. It's primarily, as you go up, especially if you want to be in J1, do you have a youth academy? Are you connected to your community? Do you have good amenities at your stadium for your fans? Do you have good changing rooms and everything else for players? Like, do you have the things to take care of your players and take care of your fans built in with your club, not population numbers and artificial stadium size numbers? Like you have to have a 15,000 seat stadium as one of the requirements, I think, for D1. But we don't say you ever have to fill it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, as somebody who grew up in the Bay, the Quakes almost never get 15,000.
So it's, I liked the structure, at least of the things I could see, because everything seemed revolved around how can we grow and deepen our soccer culture in Japan rather than how can we exclude people who aren't already in the club, in our case, MLS, and keep people out unless, we're willing to let them in. So that was the first thing I liked. So before I get into the second one, if you have any other comments, I'll let you jump in now.
No, I mean, I generally agree. I will say that the thing I have always found to be the most egregious about the PLS that you did mention, and I think because there's so much about the U.S. soccer structure that is bad, this often gets glossed over. But to me, the metro area size requirements are the most egregious part of the PLS
Mhm.
because that necessarily excludes underdog
So much of
stories.
our country.
That necessarily excludes the Wrexhams of the world. And it's
Yeah.
like, what even is this sport if the stories like Wrexham can't be told? And so I have always found that the grossest part of the PLS, and it necessitates a system that protects owners' investment before anything else, because it
Right.
necessitates that a club has like the ability to harvest money from people, you know. So I don't know.
Yes.
I don't. It's not really adding anything that that's always like, it literally makes me, gives me the ick, you know.
Right. And one of the things I liked best about that licensing system was one of the things you have to prove is how well you connect with your community. So that was, of course, as someone who's always preaching about that's how you really have a successful team. Ultimately, of course, that, that hit me in the right place for having something like that. But my second big thing that I liked in terms of them developing their pyramid, they had a vision for their pyramid based on how they put things together that a little different than, say, how England developed their pyramid. They had, I'll call it 4 different tiers. There was going to be a professional tier that could have multiple divisions in it. I mean, it started with 1 division, now there's 3, but there was a professional tier, there was a semi-professional tier underneath that. Then there was a regional tier, and then there was a local tier for their prefectures. So they really had those 4 tiers identified, and then within those you could have multiple divisions. So if you strictly look at it levels, you could say like the JFL, which is their semi-professional, kept getting pushed down. But I don't think they would look at it that way. It was really, there's a professional tier. We're going to figure out ultimately how many divisions we want there in the professional tier. And then our semi-professional will figure out how many divisions. Right now it's just 1. But there's 3 in the professional. And then the regional, depending which region you're in, there's 1 or 2, depending how dense you are with teams in those regions. And then in the prefecture leagues, you could have a couple or you could have 10 or more. Right? So I think there was a strong vision of where things fit in certain places that I think the US especially could learn from, that not to get mired down in, well, what does 4th division represent, or how many professional divisions are we going to have, or maybe I should say the USL because they're the only ones trying it rather than US. But I think there's some things from the Japanese pyramid and how it developed that we could really take and learn from, especially, because you could squeeze in another level here or there, but you would strongly identify a semi-professional level and a professional level and a regional level and so forth. I think that's something we could definitely learn from and use to our advantage in this country if we clearly identified some of those chunks of the pyramid.
Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me to think of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense when you lay it out like that.
Yeah, so that was one of the things I found interesting, and I think that's what helped them be able to do this in 35 years. They weren't tied into necessarily like which ones are professional or semi-professional, or just like there was always the semi-professional level that sat beneath the professional level. And they just like, all right, we've got 2 divisions now in the J League. Let's add a 3rd one. Who wants to move up, and be right. identified as one of these professional teams? And
I think
that gives you flexibility in your pyramid. And especially once you regionalize, it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can maintain the same regions. One region maybe only go a few levels deep, and another one could go 12 levels deep because of population density.
Yeah, I think I know this is a well we go back to a lot, but a good comparison is actually the way that the divisions work in college sports. It's less about one school moving up or down does not increase or decrease the value of another school in that division they're leaving or joining. It's about how much money do you want to spend on scholarships? How much money do you want to put into your facilities? How much money do you want to spend on staff? So it's about where do you see yourself operating? And that makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. So once again, college sports are the closest thing we have.
Yeah, it is. And my last thing was, and it ties directly into that pyramid structure. I like how they always kept the JFL as their semi-professional league. It was their semi-professional league before. They didn't try to change it and make it professional. They just always kept it as their semi-professional league. And it was intended to bridge the gap between your regional team, but you want to be a professional team. So you work your way up through the semi-professional ranks, you get your licensing and hopefully get promoted and get up into J3. But there's a transition period to kind of help, because, and I think same in this country, it is a big jump going from, I would say USL2, if we stick with USL, is a little bit more like the Japan regional leagues. So going from USL2 to USL1, I mean, I saw some owner talking about making the jump. You're talking like a $500,000 annual budget to a $5 to $6 million annual budget. We don't have a transition kind of in there between those two. And I think that was very smart on the Japanese end to really have kind of a national, well, they ran it as a national league, but to have that semi-pro in between. So people weren't making that drastic jump all the way up. And again, I think that's part of the way the pyramid was structured in Japan to help teams that wanted to move up, and the ones that did it the best, like there's a pathway, and the best teams, the best run teams, I guess, rise to the top, which constantly strengthens your top division.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had something to add, but you've laid it out pretty clearly there. We've talked about this a few times tonight, that the deeper your pyramid runs, the stronger the top of it and your federation as a whole will be.
Yeah. So let's take the rest of our time here and look at what I would say are some anti-Pro-Rel talking points. I'm going to throw some out and we'll kind of talk about them. And I'm going to try to look at it also from, not from maybe an English perspective, because I think that's what everybody jumps to. But look at some of these from a Japan perspective, who has given us a model that this can be done in 30 years. Now, can you just swap exactly what Japan did over to the US? No, of course not, right? Different cultures, different size country. But I think there are things in there that we could use, or maybe, I don't want to say negate necessarily, but maybe we could tackle some of these anti-Pro-Rel talking points and look at them from a different perspective. Now, I'm going to open this up and kind of pick on a comment, a Blue Sky post from Jason Davis, who's host of Morning Kick Around. And only because this is the one I happened to see when I was thinking about this, so I grabbed it. So I would have it and refer to it, but this is not an uncommon kind of statement, I think, in our American soccer discourse. And this is not terribly inflammatory or anything like we get, but in our American social media and in our soccer social media, we certainly have some very passionate conversations about promotion relegation. And I think just in general, our social media discourse in this country particularly is what I call is littered with binary absolutes. It's like there's only two choices possible. There's no nuance or gray area or middle ground. And people phrase things with words like never, always, everyone, no one, right? That already immediately, if someone who feels differently takes exception to that. So I'm just going to read, there's two sentences here, and I'm just going to read this just to kind of pick it apart a little bit, not again to pick on Jason Davis particularly, but this is typical of some comments that are out there. So American soccer is never going to coalesce into coherent pro-amateur structure, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. And I would argue anytime you use the word never and you pick a side, in that comment, you are inherently making a controversial statement because someone's not going to agree with that, right? So, I think sometimes people with good intentions will say something, because that was his opening sentence for the next one, which is, the future is way better if you support the soccer you like and stop making it about whatever your soccer hobby horse is. And I think there's some truth to that. Enjoy your soccer, whatever it is. But also, I think there's a tinge in there of shutting down other people's conversations, which I think we do too much. Whether you're for Pro-Rel or against Pro-Rel, I think there's an awful lot of just trying to shut people down. You're wrong, right? Just instead of having a conversation rather than, I think it's good or I think it's bad or it'll never happen or it will happen. Just, how could it happen? Is there a way we could make it happen? And would we be willing to go down that route? Clearly, we have a league, USL, that is looking to go down that route. So I think exploring some of those conversations or having some of those conversations are a good way to explore the topic, and hopefully without, shutting people down. And if I were responding to Jason Davis on this particular post, I would just say, look, Japan shows us that if you have good leadership and good organization and a strong vision of where you want to go, that this kind of thing is possible within a time frame of 30 years. And I would say right now, where we are, we have better infrastructure than what Japan had in 1990.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I would tend to agree that discourse that surrounds promotion and relegation is pretty toxic and unhelpful, though I don't think that is specifically a symptom of the pro-rel conversation, but rather a symptom of where society is at as a whole.
That's it.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah. That said, I do think that it is generally good life advice, and I had this hammered into me as a child a lot, not to speak in absolutes. Only the Sith deal in absolutes, right? The always, the nevers, the musts, the can'ts of the world are almost always exaggerations, right?
Right.
And I think that that's a really good thing to remind ourselves, not just when we're having Twitter arguments, but also just in our day-to-day lives. So, that's internet discourse. I can't even remember what the other things I wanted to say was, to be honest. But I think that sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought here. It is frustrating when people say things like, oh, just watch the game and enjoy it, right? Like there's a certain nihilism behind that opinion that is really disconcerting, but I do understand there's also some truth to it, right? But I think that's also kind of indicative of where society is at, that kind of nihilistic streak, like nothing matters, so why would you try and change anything for the better? But this is not a society podcast, so damn, I really lost my train of thought. I thought I was going to find it there for a second. I apologize. I did want to say, though, one thing you said reminded me of this. This is a tweet I come back to a lot, even though I don't use Twitter anymore. From 2017, Mr. Cooley Bravo. Twitter, the only place where well-articulated sentences still get misinterpreted. You can say, I like pancakes, and somebody will say, so you hate waffles? And it's just like, that is a really good encapsulation of the pro-rel argument that happens on social media. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought, but I did want to add that because that always makes me laugh.
Yeah, and I think the pro-rel discussions always are layered with so much, I'll call it personal bias. People are coming from a variety of different viewpoints, or they have different concerns that they want to talk about. They're doing it through the lens of pro-rel, but two people could be having really they're both talking about Pro-Rel, but they're having entirely different conversations with each other.
100%.
And I think then that makes for, like both are arguing passionately. And sometimes I'll read some of these threads, like, you guys don't realize you're both talking about two completely different things. You're just using it within the framework of Pro-Rel. And maybe you guys might be on the same page about each of your things if you realized that you were both talking about two completely different things.
This
But
is something. Sorry, that I was gonna say I see that happening a lot, and I like to call it aggressive agreement.
Yeah. All right, so let me throw out a couple of comments we hear all the time and anti-Pro-Rel type things that I have these classified into the first set of things we're going to talk about are about fans. And the first one is Pro-Rel is not part of the American sporting experience. You hear that get thrown out a lot. Like, Americans won't go for it because, we don't do that in any sports.
I mean, that is okay. So there's two statements being made there, right? There's
Right.
the objective statement being made, which is that this is not part of American sports culture. That is true. That is objectively true. Then there's the implied
professional supporting culture. I think I would quantify that to professional.
Right. And even in modern day, in non-professional soccer, we do see regional leagues with promotion relegation structures. So you're right. That is an important caveat. That is not a part of American professional sports culture. But the implied meaning when people say that is that it wouldn't work here because that's not American sports culture. That is not true. Culture can change. New things can work. And I think, honestly, the idea that Americans would reject this because it's not what we're used to is like pure fantasy. I think more than anything, this is the kind of thing that Americans would see and say, why do we not do this in all of our sports? Because it makes so much more sense. I really think that Americans, generally speaking, would be on board with promotion and relegation if they, generally speaking, understood what it was and how it works.
I think that comment, the second part of the interpretation of how you described it, is a little bit insulting, or I think someone could be insulted by a statement like that it could never work here. I think for most of us, once you found out about how, like, it's not hard to understand. It's not a difficult concept. And if we switch this back to Japan, Pro-Rel wasn't really part of the professional landscape in Japan either in any sports. A little bit in soccer when they had the JSL, the Japanese Soccer League. But it really wasn't a big thing. And now they have this full-on pyramid connecting local leagues all the way up through professional leagues and promotion relegation. I mean, and soccer being behind baseball, the number 2 team sport in Japan. So I don't think there's much direct evidence to stand on to say that it couldn't work. Now, would it I mean, that's just whether it work or people would understand it. Now, would it have great benefits? I think that's a different conversation and a different argument. But just, would it work or could it work? I mean, we've seen a country where it's very, if you think of Japan and Japan's sporting experience, as we said last time, a lot more similar to the US than dissimilar in the way they intake their sports. And no one's had a problem. In fact, their B League in basketball 10 years ago added promotion relegation. So, if we look at an example, here's a country who didn't have it in professional sports and now has it in 2 professional sports, and growing in basketball. So I don't think, I at least think that gives us a reason to be more open to the idea that it could work in the US, because we've seen it work around the rest of the world, and we've seen it work very recently in a culture that didn't really have it in any professional sports.
Well, and like I said, culture changes. That's a fundamental aspect of culture. It's not static. Um, and obviously this is an anecdote, but I have never ever explained what promotion and relegation is to someone and had them say anything in response other than that's pretty cool or some
Right.
variation of that, right?
Yeah.
They never ever say that's stupid or that doesn't make any sense. Like it's a thing that is pretty intuitive when you really get down to it. So yeah, I think the idea that Americans wouldn't be on board or understand or adopt it is kind of insulting. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other ones, and I don't think we need, I think we consistently beat this horse to death on this podcast, but one of them, US fans will not support second tier teams. Like that's just a thing. And
Just
I
telling
think
on yourself. Yeah.
we talk about high school and college sports and the amount of people who will attend games, especially in certain states at the high school level or, at the college level, the television audience, the fan participation that shows up rivals our professional leagues. And these are second tier sports, really, when you look at it. So again, and I'll always say it, I think it comes back to community when we're talking about a college. That college in the area it is, there's a sense of community for that college being within that physical location. And plus, all the people who went through that college and graduated are part of that broader community. So now you have a fan base that has spread out around the country to tune in and watch television and anything else. So, community, I'm going to keep saying it, till I die. Community is the key for the success to these things.
Yeah. Agreed.
I stumbled across one recently that I found was interesting. And it was, and I think this is a direct response to the way our current PLS is written. But the argument was, well, it could be bad for a team that gets promoted because they might have to move to a larger stadium, creating less intimate atmosphere than what they had at their other place. And then things fall apart, basically. And I was like, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. That's just like a lot of assumptions being made. And also, okay, like, sorry that very specific scenario you made up didn't happen. Does that mean we can't ever try? Like, I don't. That's another, and I'm not going to say this is a uniquely American thing, but this is another thing plaguing American society right now is like people are always arguing against these made up battles they're having in their head rather than like actual evidence presented to them.
All right, so how about this one? Common one we hear all the time, and I'm going to read two different ones, but they tie together. One is same team wins the league every year, / the same teams are at the top of the table. I mean, you alluded to this at the beginning of our podcast about Tottenham always being in one of the top 6. Or that goes along with this, only the wealthiest clubs will win trophies.
Well, okay, two things.
I mean, they kind of go together. They're along the same line.
Right. I would say that when people say the big 6, they're referring to the financial might, right? Not like literally finishing in the top 6 of the league, though that does happen sometimes. But yeah, I have really never given much credence to this the same team wins the league every year argument because A, it's not true. But B, it just makes it more exciting when someone else wins the league. You're like, I mean, if the MLS were to exist for another 500 years in its current form, I guarantee you no single league title would be as interesting or exciting as Leicester City winning the Premier League in 15-16. Like, it's just that simple. And so, sure, maybe you get... I know MLS fans will always point to the fact that there has been like 10 different winners in the last 12 years or something like that. But like, I think that really kind of buries the lead of the competitiveness, because I think if you look at like the points totals of clubs over that period of time, you're going to find it's the same like 10 to 15 clubs in the same bottom for the whole freaking time. And I know this because I grew up rooting for the Earthquakes, who, like, other than a handful of seasons, like, were the worst team in the league a lot of years. And so it's the idea that like it's another American thing, I think, and I think it's kind of born of the familiarity and like we assume a playoff system is very natural for sports, right?
Right.
But the idea that like anything short of winning the league is unsuccessful, right? Like the idea that winning the league is the only interesting thing that happens, or that like it's the only thing of value a club can achieve in a season, is a very American idea. It's a very like ring chasing kind of idea, right?
Right.
And so I guess I don't know. Yeah, Manchester City and Liverpool have been the only two clubs to win the Premier League in the last 10 years or something like that. I think Chelsea maybe had one in there. That doesn't make it uninteresting, right? Like it's still the world's most profitable league. So clearly that's not as weighty as people would have you believe when it comes to actual interest in the league. So I don't know. When people say that, what they're really trying to say is that one team dominating makes the league uninteresting, but that's just not true in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so I have two thoughts on this. The first, to go back to what you alluded to before in our American system, and I think this is an intentional design of the NFL, Major League Soccer, and so forth, is you want some parity. You want every fan base to think they have a chance to win whatever your championship is, because you have a playoff system, you have a postseason, so you don't have to be the best team in the league. All you have to do is make playoffs. So really, you don't even have to think you're the best team. You can just be the hottest team at the end of the season and then have a good run and you have a chance. So, and if you like that, if that is important to you in your sporting experience, then yeah, closed league is probably for you because you're protected. And if you're like most American leagues shoot for a little bit of parity because it's the way our whole draft system works. And it gives you the opportunity to think like that. So that's one thought. And I can see that argument. That's not me. But I can see someone feel like Pro-Rel then would jeopardize that. My team may not have a shot in the top league because if I have a bad season or a bad owner, if I have a John Fisher, then I could have been relegated 2, 3, 4, 5 leagues or whatever. So I see that from a personal, I don't know, protection standpoint, like just to protect that part of my fandom. I always have that chance. But I also think this comment about only one club wins trophies or only so many clubs is some severe tunnel vision, because it's only looking at the top league of a pyramid, because that is the only place that can happen. But every other place in the pyramid, your champion moves up. You have champions up and down the pyramid. And you have some, like a Wrexham, who've been champions 3 years in a row and keep moving up. So this, and again, I think it shows some people's mindset a little bit, is that tunnel vision of I'm only looking at the top, and then I'm only truly looking at Premier League, the Bundesliga, which is, we have an extreme example of same team winning almost every time in our most recent history. But I do think that is again, not that that's good or bad, because if that's your perspective, I want my team to have a chance to win whatever the highest trophy is at the time, then yes, you want a closed league system. And inherently that means you don't let anybody else in that would jeopardize your chance of getting it. Or you have a bad season and cause you to get knocked down. But what you're doing is excluding everybody else, as we talked about, these mid-sized cities and everything else from having a team and getting a chance to experience that. And some people are okay with that. I'm not. I think in order to strengthen soccer in this country and to have all those exciting stories that you see when people make runs or have those playoff promotions, like there's all kinds of champions and winners up and down the pyramid. To only look at what happens with a small number of teams at the top, I think fails to see the bigger picture of what a pyramid tied together with promotion relegation can bring. to a greater number of fans and cities across your country. All right. I'm going to do a quick check because I think we might have lost Dylan there for a second. I didn't have his screen up right in front of me, but I think we are. Actually, Dylan, are you there? Nope, I'm not getting Dylan. Okay, so we have a few more questions we could cover, but I think we've gone a decent amount on this podcast. We'll go ahead and start to wrap things up here, and we'll pick up some of these other questions about Pro-Rel in some of our other series. I do want to say one of the things that people who are against Pro-Rel say time and time again is that Pro-Rel cannot work in a country of our size. And that is something we will tackle on another podcast, because there are countries that are our size that are doing promotion relegation. So before we really dig into that, we probably should take a look at how they are handling or attempting to handle promotion relegation. So we'll do that in a future show. Dylan, I'm going to give you, I know you cut out there for a second, any last thoughts about our conversation here on Pro-Rel before we tidy things up and wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately my position on it is we could spend all day debunking and doing it pretty easily, debunking all of these arguments against Pro-Rel. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is that there's not a good argument against it, especially not from a fan's perspective. I think that American fans argue against it so strongly because it is just not what they're used to, and it's not the system that we have, and people don't like change, and people don't like the status quo being challenged. And I know that arguing for a different football system is not exactly like resisting the man or whatever, but
right.
people like the status quo, and whether they realize it or not, inertia is a powerful force, right? Like things that are going are more likely to keep going.
And I think, as I said towards the end of one of my other ones, I think someone could make an argument that a closed league system is good for the fans of those teams that already exist, right? They're protected. They're not going to ever suffer relegation. They can suffer poor ownership and poor years and maybe not be enjoyable to even go watch a game. We bring up John Fisher and the Oakland A's a lot on this podcast because of your experience up there, but and the earthquakes, I guess. But I think we see it much more starkly in terms of the Oakland A's. And to me, the potential, like, this is one of the biggest problems with a closed system. The fan base is upset. The owner doesn't care about the community. The owner is there to try to make some kind of money, or if he thinks he can move somewhere else to better the product. Like, we're just talking business terms. We're no longer talking community and connection and sport. So, and I think, Pro-Rel doesn't solve that at all, right? We see big money in the Premier League, and we see the problems of ticket prices going up and other things that supporters feel they're not being heard. Pro-Rel doesn't solve that, but Pro-Rel brings so many other things to the table, strengthens your entire culture, your players, everybody who's involved in the ecosystem, your national teams. Like these, instead of just having the one closed league for the people who were privileged enough that someone else anointed a team along for them, right? It's very exclusionary in our exclusive franchise systems that we typically run in American sports.
I would argue too that it's not good for the fans of those teams because it allows them to be exploited, but that's a whole other conversation, so I don't
right pit cities against cities to try to compete for use taxpayer money for
or things like the $18 beers. It's like that wouldn't happen if there was actual reasonable competition, but there isn't. So
right. Yeah. All right, Dylan, I think that wraps up our stuff, at least for this conversation. I don't know if we'll do another in our Pro-Rel Series next week. Probably be at least a week or two down the road before we get back to it. But until we come back, do you have any soccer plans coming up for the week besides watching maybe some USL Cup and maybe some Open Cup first round qualifying matches?
Yeah, definitely the USL Cup. And I'll see what I can get into on the US Open Cup.
And then next week we got Champions League back, right? We don't have Europa League or conference, do we? It's just all Champions League.
Europa League we should. Conference League I don't know because they only play 6 games in the league phase as opposed to 8.
I think if I remember last year, I thought they did one whole week of Champions League first,
maybe,
and then they got into the other groups. But there's so many games going on at the early stages of the league play. So,
oh yeah, you're right. It looks like we have Thursday Champions League games. That's bizarre.
Yeah, I think Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are all Champions League games next week.
I don't like that, to be honest.
Yeah. All right, well, you're up on Tuesday. That should feel. I think Tottenham's up on Tuesday, so that'll be some a comfort day, right? It's the correct day.
I suppose. Yeah. Oh yeah, there we go. Oh God.
All right. Well, I think that officially then wraps up this episode of the LGS Pod. If you have a question or comment about tonight's show, please drop us a note. You can do so by leaving us a comment here on our YouTube channel, or you can send us a message on Blue Sky. That's the only social media app we are using. So you can reach us at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. Or if you're listening on your podcast app, send us a text using the send us a text link at the top of the episode description. We always appreciate your comments and your feedback, and some of those help develop what potential episodes we cover. So please continue sending those in. But always, if you're available Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock Pacific time, join us live as we live stream on YouTube on our channel, and you can join us in the chat for the conversation. All right, Dylan, any final comments before we head on out?
No, I think we've covered all of my personal gripes about the Pro-Rel conversation in this country, so I can leave it there for now.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure we're gonna hit some more in later episodes when we talk Pro-Rel. All right. Thanks again for joining us tonight, everyone, for another episode of Local Grassroots Stories, and we'll see everyone again next week.